First, I want to start with an incident from 2 years ago that has kind of thrust itself back into the news today. It was this moment back in 2023 when an armed and dangerous man showed up outside the home of a former president.
There's new information on the January 6th defendant arrested near the home of former President Barack Obama here in D.C.
After federal agents spotted and chased Taylor Taranto outside the D.C. home of former President Obama, they say they found these guns, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and a machete in Taranto's van parked nearby. The feds had already been trying to arrest Taranto for allegedly being part of the mob that attacked the Capitol January 6th, for which he faces 4 misdemeanor charges. Late today, federal prosecutors told a judge Taranto could have learned Obama's address from a social media post by former President Trump. They allege Trump posted what he claimed was Obama's address on his Truth Social platform, the same day Taranto was arrested near the home.
So that's a news reporting. This is all about a former January 6th rioter who showed up armed at the home of President Barack Obama right after Donald Trump had publicly posted Barack Obama's address online. And it's sort of astounding to think about how stories like that barely broke through when Trump was mounting his second bid for the White House. Former president possibly doxing another former president, posting his home address online, and then watching as one of his criminal supporters showed up at that address with a car full of weapons. That was scary and jarring and maddening, and it should have been a major scandal at the time. But of course, despite that incident and so much else, Trump was elected to a second term. And on his first day in office, he pardoned or commuted the sentences of every single one of the January 6 rioters, including the man just mentioned in that news reporting, Taylor Taranto, the man who showed up outside Barack Obama's home with a car full of guns and explosives. But even though Trump pardoned all those rioters for their January 6 related crimes, he did not pardon them for the other crimes they committed. And so even as Trump began firing DOJ officials and appointing his own loyalists to lead the agencies, prosecutors continued to pursue the case against Taranto related to his visit to former President Obama's home. And just this May, he was convicted on charges stemming from that incident that took place outside former President Obama's home. And believe it or not, his conviction was celebrated by none other than Trump's own handpicked U.S. Attorney, Jeanine Pirro, in one of her very first press releases on the job. You can see it there on the screen. So everyone was basically in agreement. It seemed that way. Even though Trump had pardoned this guy for what he did on January 6th, he was still criminally responsible for that second incident, making bomb threats and bringing firearms and explosives to the home of President Obama. Then prosecutors did what prosecutors are supposed to do. They drafted a sentencing memo explaining to the judge why Taranto should spend at least 27 months behind bars. And in that memo, they included these 2 short sentences about the man's criminal history. On January 6, 2021, thousands of people comprising a mob of rioters attacked the U.S. Capitol while a joint session of Congress met to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election. Taranto was accused of participating in the riot in Washington, D.C. by entering the U.S. Capitol building. That was it. Just 2 short sentences that acknowledged the riot at the Capitol happened, that it was carried out by a mob of angry rioters, and that Taranto was one of them. All factual details there. It is, by any objective standard, pretty relevant information for a criminal sentencing memo. But apparently something about that memo set off officials in the Trump White House. Because just hours after filing that sentencing memo today, the 2 prosecutors who wrote it were abruptly put on leave. The Trump administration then withdrew that sentencing memo, and they refiled a new one that not only removed all references to Trump posting Barack Obama's address online, a pretty pivotal key piece here, but also removed all the references to January 6th as well. So the circumstances here pretty clearly suggest that those 2 prosecutors are not only being punished for mentioning Trump's role in this case, they're being punished for accurately describing what happened on January 6th. Which, of course, is absurd given what we witnessed with our own eyes that day. I mean, if anything, describing the attackers as a mob of rioters is kind of an understatement. I mean, just a few years ago, members of Trump's very own party described the people who attacked the Capitol in much harsher terms.
The first thing that stands out to me is how embarrassed and disgusted I am that the United States Capitol could be taken over by domestic terrorists.
I had a lot of anger, as so many of my colleagues, that the Capitol got overrun, and these were anarchists and terrorists.
We are approaching a solemn anniversary this week, and it is an anniversary of a violent terrorist attack on the Capitol.
The recent discussions surrounding former President Trump's handling of the Taylor Taranto case has once again brought concerns about political influence within the U.S. justice system back into focus. To recap, Taranto, a January 6 defendant, was arrested near the home of former President Barack Obama in 2023, with multiple firearms and ammunition in his vehicle. According to reports, he may have found Obama's address through a social media post made by Donald Trump himself. At the time, the event barely broke through national headlines. But the story has resurfaced because of a new controversy. 2 federal prosecutors were reportedly placed on leave after referencing both Trump's post and the January 6th riot in a sentencing memo. The memo was later withdrawn and replaced, removing all mention of those details. This development raises a broader question. Is the justice system being pressured to avoid references that could be politically inconvenient? Legal experts say mentioning factual context in a sentencing memo is standard practice. Yet the removal of those facts and the suspension of the prosecutors point to growing tension between the Department of Justice and the current administration. While supporters of Trump argue the changes were made to maintain neutrality and prevent political bias, critics see it as a concerning example of selective censorship, especially when the facts being removed are matters of public record. In the end, the issue goes beyond a single case. It speaks to a much larger challenge: maintaining the independence of federal institutions in an increasingly polarized environment. For many Americans, it's another reminder that political power and legal authority are becoming harder to separate.